The illness from Asia. Once, there was a man named John who lived a normal, productive life. He had a good job as a manager at a successful company, a loving wife named Sarah, and 2 young children. He was respected in his community and was known for his quick wit and intelligence. It all started on a business trip to Asia. John had always been fascinated by the culture and was excited to finally have the opportunity to visit. During his trip, he was introduced to the art of using chopsticks and quickly became enamored with the delicate utensils. He would spend hours practicing and learning new techniques. It was a fun hobby that he picked up. At first, his fascination with chopsticks didn't affect his daily life. He continued to use regular utensils at home and at work, but he would often use chopsticks at restaurants and for special occasions. But over time, John's chopstick usage began to increase. He started using chopsticks at home for small tasks, like picking up a single grape from the fruit bowl. His wife, Sarah, thought it was amusing, and they would laugh it off. But soon, John's usage of chopsticks became more frequent, and he started using them for things that were not suited for them. He would attempt to eat soup with them, or even use them to stir his coffee, which made a mess. Sarah grew increasingly concerned, as she saw it starting to affect his performance at work. John would fumble with his chopsticks during important meetings and presentations. His co-workers started to take notice, and they would mock him behind his back. Sarah decided to have a talk with him, expressing her concerns and worried about how this obsession was starting to impact their relationship and his career. "John, I know you love chopsticks and it's all fine, but this is getting out of hand. It's starting to affect your job and your reputation. We need to talk about it," Sarah said, with a worried look on her face. John, at first, didn't want to hear any of it. He felt like this was his personal interest, and nobody should be telling him what to do. But he soon realized that Sarah was right, and he started to cut back on his chopstick usage. However, it was too late. The damage was already done, and his boss had already noticed his peculiar behavior, and his job performance had suffered. Despite his best efforts, John lost his job, and it was hard for him to find a new one, as his reputation had preceded him. Without his job and with mounting financial pressures, John's obsession with chopsticks became more extreme, and it began to consume his entire life. One morning, John's wife Sarah was getting ready for work. The children were still asleep and John was already at the office. As she went about her morning routine, she couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. She couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her. But something felt off. As she walked past the bathroom, she noticed that the door was slightly ajar, and she could hear rustling from inside. Sarah thought it was strange because John had already left for work. She walked closer to the door and listened carefully. She could hear what sounded like paper crumpling. She hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. Inside, Sarah found John, sitting on the toilet with a look of distress on his face. He had a package of chopsticks in one hand, and he was trying to use them to remove pieces of feces from his bottom with the other. Sarah was horrified, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She felt sick to her stomach. "John, what are you doing? Oh my God!" Sarah exclaimed, with shock and disgust in her voice. John looked up at her, with tears in his eyes. He couldn't even speak. He was mortified and deeply ashamed. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he stammered, "I didn't mean for you to see this. I know it's disgusting and wrong, but I just couldn't stop myself. I can't help it." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears, and she began to cry. She felt like her husband, the man she loved, had been replaced by a stranger. "John, how long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "It started a few months ago, And it just kept getting worse, and I couldn't tell you. I was ashamed, and I didn't want to disappoint you, John replied, hanging his head in shame. Sarah walked towards him and hugged him tightly. But this time, things were different. Her patience had run out, and she could not take it anymore. She had to take the kids and leave. John knew he needed help, but it was too late. As he looked at the chopsticks in his hand, he couldn't help but wonder how something so small and insignificant could lead to such a tragic end. He had lost everything: his job, his family, his friends, his dignity. John was now alone and isolated, with only his chopsticks for company. He realized too late the extent of his obsession and how it had destroyed his life. To this very day, John sits alone in his small apartment, surrounded by chopsticks and takeout containers, a shadow of the man he once was, ruined.